Was surfing the web and I came across this article. It's interesting to see how liberals go at each other over issues. And this article is by Rashid End White Supremacy, and it came out way back on February 26th. But I thought it was very interesting. Some of the points that he went over as he was talking about Yvette Carnell and Tone talks about the ADOS movement. Okay, he says, in real life, in the foreseeable future, are the ideas and tactics promoted by ADOS leaders going to produce reparations for black people, or are they going to produce increased white influence over the U.S. government, including an increased ability to deny reparations? There are three things the ADOS movement does that strengthen white power. Number one, it offers false or petty criticisms of other black people. Number two, it opposes non white immigration to the U.S. And number three, it discourages black people from voting. Okay, outside of these three negative elements, the ADOS identity is a useless but harmless preference. It personally benefits its leaders even if reparations are never achieved and the larger black community's suffering increases. Okay, to get substantial payments to compensate U.S. descendants of enslaved people for the injustices done on their ancestors, a reparations movement will need the support of at least half the members of the U.S. Congress. The ADOS movement does not have U.S. congressional support, nor does it have any realistic or plausible plan to get the congressional support reparations require. Okay, the ADOS movement, under the leadership of Yvette Carnell, Antonio Moore, and others, has no potential to ever deliver the support of half of the U.S. Congress. Over 70% of U.S. voters are white, and most whites are comfortable with the primary legacy of slavery in the U.S. The condition that whites generally control more resources than black people, ADOS leaders do not solve, address, or even consider the key obstacle to reparations, which is that whites are a majority of U.S. voters, and around 90% of whites oppose paying substantial reparations to black people. ADOS justice claims have no value without congressional votes, which ADOS leaders have no ability to produce. While the ADOS movement does not have even an outside hope of delivering reparations, it is guaranteed to deliver something else: increased white power that enables whites to deny reparations even longer. Okay. Three pro white elements of the ADOS movement are: one, criticisms of black people who are not descended from U.S. slaves to refute the idea that black people's interests are widely aligned; two, opposition to immigration and support for right wing white measures to limit non white immigration; and three, calls for black people to boycott voting, sometimes expressed as a vague demand for tangibles. None of these three elements offer potential to gain sufficient congressional support for reparations. And all of these elements entrench the white voting majority that prevents reparations. Okay, criticisms of other black people. There is an historically false white serving narrative presented by the main ADOS leaders and some supporters that Africans were equal partners with whites in the industry of capturing black people in Africa and transporting them to the Americas. The reality is that usually militarily overmatched black people were played against each other to cooperate with whites. There have been single families where some members were captured to become ancestors of black people in the U.S., and others were not captured and are ancestors of black people in Africa. As one example, some Mende people captured some Temne people in territory now called Sierra Leone. Some Temne people also sold some Mende captives to whites. Some Temne and Mende people escaped capture while their parents, siblings, or children didn't. Both sides were impoverished by their interactions with whites. Descendants of both tribes exist in Africa and in the United States. In no practical sense were there ever two distinct groups where one sold the other to whites. The biggest mistake the Mende, Timne, and all black people have made historically until now has been to cooperate with whites. Ironically, ADOS leaders refuse to prioritize the black and human conflict with whites over their differences with other groups of black people. Okay. Yvette Carnell, Antonio Moore, and other ADOS leaders likely would have been willing and eager traders of other African groups if they had lived in Africa in 1619. Other criticisms made by ADOS leaders and supporters of other black people are far more petty and even silly. Complaints about immigrants getting scholarships, film roles playing black people from the U.S., or even individuals supposedly looking down on black people from the U.S. are trivial compared to several centuries of massive transfers of wealth from black people to whites. Okay. Whites have taken wealth from black people inside and outside of the U.S. during and after slavery. Whites are the only group that has established global racial supremacy, the condition that black people control fewer resources than whites, contributing to or escalating conflict between different groups of black people is an accommodation to white supremacy. Immigration by non-white people. The proportion of whites U.S. voters decreased between 1992 and 2008 from 84% to 74%. The electorate of 1992 would not have selected Barack Obama or any candidate who would not promise whites to punish black people by being tough on crime. By 2008, a candidate would be elected against the will of most whites who believed and said mass incarceration had gone too far, as well as that all people's health care should be paid for by government if necessary. In 2008, whites voted against Barack Obama by about 55 to 45%. Hispanic voters favored Obama by over 65% to 35%, telling black people to hold your own nuts or stop assisting Hispanics or any other non-whites in conflicts with whites is not being neutral. It is actively providing assistance to whites. Okay. Whites have real strategic reasons to oppose non-white immigration. Non-white immigration makes it more difficult for whites to put their favorite candidates into office. Black people who join whites to oppose non-white immigration are working against the interest of black people as well as against reparations, voting boycotts, okay? The conflict between all black people and whites is much bigger, older, and more important than conflict against the minority of whites who support the least anti-black of the two viable U.S. political parties. When black people don't vote, whites can and do just put the most anti-black candidate into office. ADOS leaders ask for tangibles without saying what tangibles they want because they don't have specific practical or realistic demands. If they had proposals, they wouldn't ask for tangibles. They would ask politicians to respond to their specific proposals. Tangibles is a vague and unserious request designed to help whites by manipulating black people into not voting for the viable candidate least harmful to the black community. Okay, allowing whites to choose the president in 2016 had real consequences of black people serving longer sentences, losing health care, and voting rights. There are black people in prison today who would be with their families if a small number of black people didn't surrender their vote in 2016. ADOS leaders are preparing to build on their success at increasing the amount of black people in prison by supporting the candidate most popular with whites in 2020. This is a weak and craven betrayal of the black community. Okay. The impulse to become or remain divided in smaller groups that are easier for whites to dominate is not new or unique to ADOS. Accepting division from other black people and being willing to stand by or even assist whites in conflict with other black people is a centuries long historical mistake black people have been making that in fact allowed white supremacy to be established in the first place. Okay. The ADOS movement reflects a desire based on love for and fear of whites to redirect the pain of living in a society where whites control more resources into anger or at other black people. It's a safe but self destructive outlet for widespread black anger at the current political situation. ADOS is a dysfunctional response to feelings of powerlessness emerging from living under white supremacy. ADOS is usually unwittingly a tool for increasing white power. So, what do y'all think about that article? I'll definitely want to get y'all feedback and opinions on it. I'm going to just leave it at that. I'm going to let y'all go ahead and say what y'all think about it. And I'll go ahead and respond in the comment section. But thank you for watching. Get the likes up.